Photoshop has added some features to it that will help us that look quite a bit like Lightroom. And I want to go over one of those features, and it's called using Camera Raw filter. Typically, you would think of Camera Raw as editing any photograph that's in RAW format, and that is the best way to edit it. But there are times when you don't have Camera Raw footage, so you can use the regular JPEGs or the PNG files that you may come across. So I want to go over a little bit about how to use that Camera Raw filter to get the best value. On the screen, I placed the same photograph, but in 3 different versions. On the far right, you have the original shot. On the far left, you have it with me moving the camera filters to give it a nice contrast and also as close to the original color as possible. And then in the middle, an extreme look at it just so you can see how you can move these dials to be creative at times. So I want to go over how to use that in the new Photoshop. So the first thing you want to do is go to Filter at the top of the screen, and then you want to go to Camera Raw Filter. With that, on the right side is the important side for you to observe what you can do with the camera filter. We are going to use some basic functions. There are several other functions you can use, but I'm going to stick with the basics because it will take care of this particular picture that we have here. At the top of that screen, you will see a histogram of the colors that are on the palette. And also it will give you a good idea of the spread of the colors from left to right. Left being the darkest portion and right being the whitest portion. The highlights are the whites in the picture, so that if I were to move this highlights to the extreme level, if you watch very carefully, the whites will then get as white as they can get. Look at the backdrop here, look at the white on the shirt at the bottom, and look at the model's watch band. They are very white. And then when you take it to the opposite direction, it will take the spotlight off of the highlights. Note that when you move the highlight slider from right to left, when you go to the left, you'll notice 2 things. The histogram goes further away from the right side because now you're moving the whites closer to the darkest colors or the blacks. At the same time, let me go back and show you this a comparison so you can see the difference. Then when you go back, then you'll notice that the white button lights up for the highlight section, and most of the histogram starts shifting to the right side to let you know that the whites are there. Double click on that arrow anytime you want to go back to the original and it will correct it. The same way with the shadows. If I take the shadows all the way to the left, note that the histogram then moves also to the left. The picture gets darker as well, and it's primarily in the areas where it was black, that is the camera stand and the back on the left hand side. You'll note that they are now black. And also, if I decide that I want to affect as much of that as I can, I will then move it to the opposite direction, and it will take out as much of the black. You'll see up on the histogram that now most of the slider in the histograms have moved to the right. And that's what it will do as well. So I'm going to double click on the shadow. So basically the highlights and the shadows are your key areas, and you're trying to work it so that you get the best highlights all the way to the best shadows, so that you get a truer color of what you have there on the screen. This is a short 2-step process that I typically will do when I'm trying to get the most realistic look for what I shot. So the first thing I do is I remove all of the highlights by taking it all the way down, and then the next slider is shadows. I will then move it all the way to the right, which now opens up. Look at the histogram again, and you'll see that a large portion of the colors have moved to the middle of the histogram scale up here in terms of exposure. Now what I want to do now is I want to make sure that I get the best possible color, so I'm going to move the whites slider to the right until I see that that button lights up there at the top of the screen. That tells me that I've hit a point where I have whites in there, but it also moved the scale so that most of the colors will be as white as you can. In fact, look very carefully at the armband on our subject, also at the barcode at the bottom, and you'll see they're pretty close to being white. Likewise, my next step is to move the blacks as far as I can to the left until I light that as well. Now, you'll note that it's already lit black, and that's because it has hit the black in this area. Now, you may have to make some more adjustments. For instance, do I want the black to be blacker based upon the stand that's here? Do I want the black to be based upon the black that's in the logo? Or do I want a black based upon what the hanger has on it? So in my case, I'm going to move this black, watching the pictures, watching the colors, and it's to the point of where I want. So now that gives me the truest color based upon the way I shot it. I have some more other functions I can use too. For instance, if I wanted to really have a contrast between the black and the whites, I can move that contrast slider, and you'll note that it has now changed colors as well for the item. It's also darkened the skin because this contrast slider is going to change the entire picture. Next, I can go down to clarity to change the tone just a little bit. Watching my sliders move, always watch your graph here. It will tell you how it's spreading the colors, and watching your screen will also help. And then I'll dehaze. What dehaze does is it gets rid of some of the fogginess it gets. It also darkens the picture a little bit, so you may have to go back up to the exposure and lighten it up a bit to get the kind of color that you want. Once I do that and I am satisfied with this particular item, I can then save it, and then that will be the new file that I'm working with. You have some other sliders here, such as the vibrance and the saturation. The way I've been taught, the vibrance is for skin tones and the saturation is for your basic colors. So you'll notice how vibrant that gets. Saturation, that changes the shirt. But now, well, let's watch the model when I add. So it does some changing to the model's arm as well. And you can always, like I said, if you go too far, you always have the ability to double click and go back to 0 and start all over again. You play with it, you look at your scales at the top there to see if it's giving you the widest range of possible colors. Does the picture here look very close to the way you expected it in terms of the color for what you're trying to identify? And then after you're satisfied, you go down here to your right corner that says, okay, I like this. And once it does that, it brings that picture back to this screen in the style that you want. Now, I was using the image on the far right. I can now save that image as a new look. That's a quick way of using the Camera Raw filter to get the kind of color that you want. There were other dials you can use with the Camera Raw filter. I didn't go over them, but you can feel free to go in there because it's non-destructive. You can go in there and just play around with it. So I gave you the 3 different tones of what you can do using that Camera Raw filter. I'm going to close that file, and then I'm going to go back to arrange it so you can look at the original in the middle now, and the 2 sides that I have used to make the changes in the color and how extreme that can get. Remember, use your histogram at the top, use your dials on the right hand side, and watch on the screen to see if the item that you're adjusting tone and color match with what you imagine them to be. That's just a quick look at what Camera Raw filter will do with the Photoshop.